Sabah el MeeM. I can actually say it right now because it is morning. It's morning of Thursday, the 23rd of July, 2020. And welcome everybody to the second episode of Sabah el MeeM, the queer Arab arts chat show with your host, me, Alice Guthrie. And I'm so excited today and thrilled to welcome my second guest, Amahl Raphael Khouri. Here they are.
Hey Alice, how's it going?
How's it going with you?
It's okay. It's okay.
So Amahl for anybody, or Raphael for anybody. I did it already. I was going to try and say Raphael. For anybody that doesn't know Amahl Raphael Khouri's work, they're a documentary playwright doing amazing work, including, we're going to get into the detail of the work more during this chat, of course, but including the first ever trans Arab play, right? Is that right?
Yeah.
First and definitely not the last, called She, He, Me, that has been performed in German, in English and in Arabic now, I guess, or maybe just readings in Arabic, but it's...
Yeah, readings in English and Arabic, full performance in German. Well, we had an online kind of, it was between a reading and a performance in English recently, so I'm not sure, it's kind of in between those two.
I kind of saw that as a performance, but I'm not a theatre person, so maybe, yeah, that's a simplistic reading of, reading, no pun intended, of the situation. So anyway, welcome to this mega million audience show, Amahl, Raphael. And it's really great to have you here. And I think it would be really cool if we could start actually by just finding out what is documentary theatre, because I, like a lot of people, hadn't really heard of it, and I guess you hadn't really heard of it maybe when it came into your life, right?
Yeah, I hadn't heard of it at all. I was in Alexandria at a theater festival that used to take place in Alexandria annually. I don't think it does anymore, and there was a German curator who was giving a kind of overview of German theater, and that included documentary theater. And so that was the first time I had heard of it, and it was kind of like something exploded in my head, because I had no idea that you could just take people's documentary play just as you would a documentary film. And so I hadn't heard of it either. I'd never seen one, and then I started to write one without having seen one. You know, I started to Google it and ask people, and I kind of went through it that way.
Okay, and so what was the very first? But hang on. So what kind of theatre were you doing before then? Were you acting at that stage?
I was an apprentice to a well-known theater director, stage director in Lebanon, with the plan of becoming a stage director myself. And then I couldn't find the script that I wanted to direct, you know? And so that was the main problem. There was this gap, and everybody was staging already existing plays, and I'm, you know, I was working as a journalist at the time, so it just seemed like a natural fit. And I had been thinking about documentaries before, or making documentary films. I'm not really big on fiction per se, although I believe less and less in these categories. So
yeah,
kind of how it happened.
Yeah, and we didn't say actually where you're from. You're Jordanian, right? And you grew up in other parts of the world as well.
Saudi Arabia. I was born in the US when my father was studying there, and then we moved to Saudi Arabia, and then to Jordan as a teenager, and then I studied in Beirut.
Mm-hmm. So it was during the period in Beirut that this kind of revelation happened about documentary theatre existing. No. And then
back to Beirut. I studied in Beirut in the mid-90s, and then in 2008, after traveling a lot and living in various countries like France and the US, I decided it was time to go home, and I went back to Beirut rather than Jordan, because I felt it was a much more rich environment to create theater in, and that's shortly soon after, that's when it happened. Yeah, when it happened.
And perhaps a richer environment to be queer in as well, one should say. Would you say? Or is that something
absolutely.
at that time, especially?
Yeah, I had been part of HLM when I was living in Paris in 2004 when they started. They also created a Paris branch because there's so many.
We should just say for anyone that doesn't know what HLM is.
HLM is an LGBT organization that started, I think, in 2004, chiefly in Beirut, and it was the first of its kind really in the Middle East, as far as I know. Although I do know that around that time there was one that started in Algeria, I think, and so is quite a groundbreaking event. And so because there's a huge Lebanese diaspora, another kind of HLM branch, I would call it, was started in Paris, and I was a part of that. So yeah, I forgot the question now.
Yeah, where were we going with that? So you came back. So that I was saying about it being a richer kind of environment to be queer in as well at that time, and you were involved in HLM, and you came home to Beirut, and then it was from there that the kind of revelation about documentary theatre happened, I guess, in this festival in Alexandria. Now I'm like becoming your biographer. So what was the first kind of documentary theatre piece that you did? Was it the one about the queer women?
Yes. I started to write this play about trans people, and it was still very much developing, and in the meantime I was approached by a friend of mine in Beirut saying there's this conference at the American University of Beirut about bodies in public. We should do something about queer people and queer women, and we should be represented in this conference somehow. And so they knew that I was doing theater, and they approached me and said, why don't you help us create this? And so we met, and we created a documentary piece about queer women. They did a gender queer person, so it wasn't all women. And we performed it in a closed
robotic there for a
performance.
Second. We're getting some signal issues. You had an amazing robotic delivery of queer women in Beirut. It came out with an amazing sound effect, for me at least. I'm guessing it's also on the recording. Yeah, that could be the new edition. The 2020 edition could be the fucking robot version.
Cover a solar system that is exactly like ours, so it could be there's a parallel universe now, like we always suspected. But yeah.
So yeah, and that was performed at the time?
That was performed in a closed performance. It was by invitation only, or if friends of friends, members, participants in this conference. We didn't have the media. We didn't announce it anywhere, and so yes, it was done at a yeah.
This is like authentic 2020 quality, isn't it? Historians will be researching this stuff if there's historians.
If there's a future.
Yeah. So okay, so it's performed in a closed performance, but even that must have been quite groundbreaking back then, because we're talking when 2005 or something.
14. No.
14. Okay, yeah. But even still, right? There's been so little really of stuff like that.
Yeah, I know of only one other queer play that had been written up to that date. So this was the first queer women's play by and for queer women that I know of, also in an Arab country. So it was groundbreaking in that sense. Yeah, even though it was closed, it was I guess a moment, you know.
Yeah,
we couldn't
absolutely
open because the women were not out to their families or to their employers, and so that would have been dangerous for them, you know.
Yeah, and just for anybody who maybe doesn't know that, I mean, there's it's not like that's all solved now by any means. I mean, interesting for this show, trying to work out who, you know, who's able to be and even do this, even an online, you know, small discussion isn't safe for almost anybody who lives in those places still, who's queer,
Yeah,
and there's no such thing as really being fully out in the kind of
right.
Western sense of the word, I guess.
Yeah,
But yeah, let's talk about She, He, Me, because that's your famous trans play, which we were mentioning at the start. It was recently performed in English on Zoom, and
yeah.
it's groundbreaking. I mean, you know, even to do a play about queer women in the Arab world was really groundbreaking. But to do a play about trans Arabs is pretty huge, right? So I wondered what kind of responses and reactions you've had to that.
From whom?
In general, I was thinking about recently, I guess there was quite a lot of positive reaction from the community, right, when it came out on the digital show, the Zoom version. Um,
Um, yeah, it was the first time that people back home could watch this play that they had heard me talk about or post about for many years, and so that was a big deal. I guess one of the upsides of COVID-19, you know, is that people are getting to see theater shows that they previously didn't have access to, and so that was good. I did get a lot of positive feedback from people I knew and people I didn't know, and it was written up in Time Out, the whole festival, not just my play.
mhm.
So yeah,
I guess my question, in a way, is more broadly like around the importance of doing this work and how does it feel to be in that kind of vanguard? Um, and do you see it as an activist thing to do or more as creative art, or is it not possible to separate them?
yeah, it is an activist thing because I don't have the kind of brain like like a lot of my friends work in NGOs and they know about social work, and I don't really have that kind of brain, and so it for me it is my way of trying to create change as much as you know, I don't like art to be didactic or anything like that, but
Mm,
you know, somehow I do want to create change, and it's pretentious to say so, but that's my aim in doing it, or at least, you know, for me, I'm kind of creating the theater that I would like to see. I mean, I've seen a trans person once in my whole life on stage, so
mm,
um,
wow,
so it's just, yeah, at least for, you know, maybe it's selfish. It's like I wanted to see trans people on stage and have their
so
stories on stage.
selfish. Um, yeah, that's a pretty potent
I
combination of
lost you.
reasons. I guess we both think that the other one's frozen. I mean, we both experience it as the other one freezing. It's quite weird. Um, I'm talking about the Zoom call. um, so we're not on Zoom actually. But I want okay. So tell me about what you're working on right now, because I think you're doing some stuff about plague, right?
Yeah,
What's
one
going
thing
on
that
with that?
sorry, that's one thing I'm thinking a lot about. I've been kind of obsessed with this French theoretician called Artaud, who was writing in the 20s and 30s, and in that period, especially about the relationship of theater to the bubonic plague. And so when I was younger, I was very attached to that writing, and it always stayed in my mind. And then when COVID hit, it was like, oh, wow, maybe I can use this as a tool to understand what's happening to me as somebody who doesn't love theater. Like it, you know, he was always talking about the relationship of these two things, and it's a very transcendental kind of mystical text that's really out there, and it didn't make sense to me. I was trying to make sense of it for a long time. Sorry, I'm gonna shut that off. And it finally made sense to me like 15 years after having read it. And I had taught a course in playwriting in January, and I had taught them about this text, and then, you know, like 3 weeks later, literally there we were. And so it's a lifetime opportunity to experience a plague and to do theater. And so I'm writing a bit about what that text means to me, and what the plague is for, what it means as people who do theater. I know it's a bit vague to say, but generally, I found myself not missing theater, unlike a lot of my theater friends, and I couldn't understand why until I went back to Artaud's text, and I understood that theater is a kind of, the plague is a kind of double to theater, and that's what I think he means. His book is called The Theater and Its Double, and people always speculate as to what this double is, and I suspect he means the plague, because he mainly talks about the plague, but it's not a concrete agreement on what the double is. So for me, it's the plague and what the plague teaches us about theater. And I found, it's spoiler alert, but I found that what was happening outside the theater was more theatrical than what was happening inside it, and truer to theater, and like really the actual, that's real theater. You know, what we're doing in the building is like, it's nothing compared to what the plague has been doing, and you can see that by following the news, and it's astonishing because you no longer are sure what's real and what's not. And so
and
those are
especially if
kinds
you've already gone,
Say it
sorry.
again. Say it again.
I was going to say, especially if you've already been working on documentary theatre, so the boundaries are kind of blurred already, right? And so now, yeah, as you say, you don't really know what's real and what's not. You don't know what's theatre and what's not. But also pretty crazy that you'd been, it sounds like, theoretically preparing yourself for a pandemic. You've been sort of like doing home education plague studies for a while there, like under the radar. That's kind of strange.
Yeah, it was strange, and I was like, at some level, I was like, shit, did I cause this to happen? You know, but I had a bit of a narcissistic moment where it's like children, you know, convinced that everything is their fault or something. I was like, but and it had been like, I had been studying it. It was all fun and games, you know. It was all like very exotic and crazy to think about the plague, and very romantic, and people dissolving and their lungs, you know, all the descriptions that he used about people's lungs and brains and the pus and all of that were like, it was all kind of fun and games until it started to happen. Yes. And I think I couldn't understand what he really meant until now, even though I have been holding this text close to me for over 15 years. It didn't make sense until now. I don't think you can. I think that his capacity for having those insights is astounding, having not lived through a plague himself. But I attribute it a lot to his use of hallucinogens in Mexico, and I think that kind of gave him an insight into other dimensions.
That'll do it, yeah. You slipped into another dimension for a moment, but I think it seems that you're back. So it gave him an insight into another dimension, you were saying?
Yeah, because I don't see how else he could have understood things about the bubonic plague and about theater with that kind of ease otherwise.
Yeah. So you managed to find a sort of shamanic theatre theorist, in a way. I mean, I don't mean that he identified as shamanic, but it sounds a bit like that kind of work.
Very
and he's a strong inspiration.
Say that again?
He's a strong inspiration for you, I think, right? In general, and informs your work.
Yeah. Because he's always been pro-shamanism and pro-ritual and anti-psychology in theater, and I never understood what that meant until now, really. And it's something I've always aspired to, but could never deeply understand. But Achto tells us that we've departed, like we've gone really, really far from where theater started, and where it needs to be and what its roots are. And I think that's calling to me personally right now, is to look again at the ritual and shamanism that theater comes from, and to keep it in mind, because what we have now is a very corrupted capitalist form of that. I think, and is the one who helped me see that.
Yeah, well, it certainly sounds good to kind of pull all types of power that we can. It's like we kind of need what's the word, you know, like all hands to the wheel or something. I mean, if we can find shamanic practices and reclaim kind of witchcraft within the arts, I mean, never was it more needed perhaps than now, one could argue, right? So yeah, perhaps there's some kind of exciting element to this kind of shearing off of so much superfluous stuff from the arts. I mean, I don't say that lightly, as somebody who's, you know, looking at the likely end of this version of my livelihood as working in the arts due to the funding kind of crisis that's looming or happening. So I don't mean to be at all flippant about it, but there is something interesting about if capitalist versions of things have to drop away to some extent. Obviously, there's you know, all sorts of darker scenarios that are like capitalism gets even more embedded too.
Yeah, but to answer that, it's like the reason that, you know, people like you and I are, you know, on the margins of this thing of arts and theater also is connected to that, because they have become so much about entertainment, and those of us who are, you know, women or LGBT or Black or POC are put on the margins of this whole system of, you know, racial and sexist capitalism, heterosexism. So actually going back will bring us back to the center and where things should be. You know what I mean? Is that kind of, I don't know if that's making sense.
Yeah. I mean, I was also thinking it's funny, isn't it? This whole thing of we also get I mean, like right now we're doing a show that is like about, you know, queer people, and there's these moments when, you know, like that's actually why we're able to do this. That's a strange thing to work with as well, like you know, kind of pitching like a moment with real life queer people or something. It's a funny way to work, but I mean, maybe this is like now the time to talk from there a bit about your own journey with gender and kind of the wider situation for trans and queer and LGBT people in the Arab sphere, in the Arab universe. Yalla. Well, so you want? Do you want to tell us what your gender story is? You don't have to.
I felt bigendered all my life, I think, and but due to the prevalence of extreme levels of toxic masculinity around me growing up in Saudi Arabia and Jordan, I think I could no longer distinguish between masculinity.
Yes, you could no longer distinguish between masculinity and
toxic masculinity.
Right. And you were being raised as a girl at this point.
Yes, I was raised as a girl, and I think that put me off for a long time. That's one reason. And also, you know, being trans is something that wasn't an option when I was growing up. I'm 43 years old, and I was born in the 70s, you know, so the binary was for us a biological fact, you know. And so it's only recently that, you know, the children have gotten rid of that idea, and I salute them for it, and it's helped me a lot, actually.
But you felt bi gender basically within yourself.
Yeah.
And you even identified at some stage as bi gender, I think. Did you?
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
Mm.
But I see it as bi-gender in the sense where I was both at once, and you know, I lived as a female for 42 years, and now I'm gonna live as a male for the rest. So it's like I'm dedicating half my life to one gender and the other half to another, if that
That's
makes
very
sense.
fair.
Yeah.
You didn't want to take sides.
No.
But what happened with the toxic masculinity? Did you have a process whereby you were able to find a masculinity that you could, well, you must have done, otherwise you wouldn't be doing it, right? I guess.
Yeah, I think I was helped very much by by some queer women, especially one friend in particular who I would say she doesn't identify as a femme, but I mean she can be perceived as very feminine, and it was actually her who helped me identify a lot the difference between, like, the fact that not all masculinity is toxic, and that you know, just being a woman doesn't mean that you're an amazing person, or you're a pure person, or you're a nice person. You know what I mean? Like, she helped me kind of untangle the whole oversimplification. And I felt like a lot
Yeah.
of, like, you know, I felt like I was betraying the whole cause. And I had, you know, I was living in San Francisco in the 90s, and it was a very, you know, militant kind of lesbian scene that I was a part of, and we were feminists, and you know, it was like, it was very, it was a very, very cut and dry period of time for gender, and so there wasn't a lot of acceptance of people who were female, assigned female at birth, and who had decided to transition, or not decided. I don't know if it's a choice any more than being queer is a choice. So there was a lot of hostility. There wasn't a lot of acceptance from cis people, nor from gay or lesbian people, and so, you know, there, and already dealing with being queer in the 90s was a huge trauma for me, in terms of, you know, being rejected by society and by my family, and just dealing with uh, all kinds of prejudices and self-hate. So it was very difficult for me to even though I knew that it would be there, and it was there even in the 90s. It was like, it was such a tempting choice, but I was just like, I can't deal with one more thing, you know. So I was like, I need to put this off, and I did, for better, for worse.
Yeah. And I mean, that's a whole lot of stuff to be dealing with, really. And how wonderful that, like, through friendships you were able, and especially one friendship, that you were able to really untangle that binary, or deconstruct that binary, really, between toxic masculinity and virtuous femininity, or whatever.
Yeah.
And and how about in the, so I wanted to talk to you a bit about the situation now for people in, I don't really want to say always Arab world, because it makes it sound like everyone's an Arab and everyone's speaking Arabic, but it's a simple way to say the kind of majority Arabic speaking region. So for anybody who doesn't know that story, Noor Hisham Salim is the trans male son of a very famous Egyptian actor. And this recently has been a big positive, for want of a better word, story in Egypt, around this kind of massive media acceptance of this person being trans, and lots of kind of loving, lovely public kind of stuff. But as we know, not least with the tragic story of Sada Hijazi, who we mentioned in the last episode as well. Obviously, it's not that simple. But yeah, I wondered if you could talk a bit about kind of where we're at now for trans people and LGBT people.
I think sadly we're not in a better place really than we were when I was growing up, and
Not at all.
barely, just maybe a smidgen, I would say. And it's been hard
Mm.
for me to accept that, because for a long time I thought it was, until I read the hate comments and the hate posts that came after Sarah Hijazi died.
Oh, fucking hell.
Should I start again?
No, I could hear you. I was just reacting to what you said.
Yeah. Yeah, so it was kind of like I realized that actually I'm living in a bubble, and I have a couple of progressive friends, and I had been
Mm.
fooled. No, it's like the acceptance levels aren't there any more than they ever were, or ever were not. And it also happened, like there was another honor crime in Jordan a couple of days ago, and the same kind of reality check happened for me, in the sense that there was a lot of mainstream people who were just expressing their sympathy for the father who had killed his daughter, and
Oh,
said
God.
that he did the right thing. And so, yeah, I'm not sure that it's better. And I think especially with this counter revolution that we're living in, I think no. There is maybe more visibility. I don't know if visibility always translates into more rights. Um, I'm not sure that it does. It just maybe makes you feel a little bit less alone.
Mm.
But I don't think we have more. I mean, trans people don't have rights in Jordan still. They don't have rights anywhere in any Arab country, from what I can see. I mean, in Egypt you can transition, but after you get like, from what I've heard from friends, it's like you have to get an Azhar to sign onto it, and there is, I think, a surgeon who's doing surgeries, but no. Um,
I I suppose one. So I suppose one of the issues there is this thing about we have to look at it intersectionally. I mean, with Noor Hisham Salim. For some reason, I have a problem with remembering his name. You know, clearly he's from uber elite, you know, background, like a megastar's family, and you know, spends time in London and so on. Which is not to criticise him at all, but that's a very specific kind of set of privileges that within which his transition has happened, right? So it would be naive. I know it would be completely, well, it'd be mad to assume that his situation is the same as somebody in a totally different demographic within Egypt. But I wonder, and not to negate at all what you said just now, which makes me want to just kind of end the recording and lie down in a darkened room, really, because it's so grim. But I wonder what it would have been like for you when you were growing up in Jordan, if there'd been, you know, the trans man, son of a famous Egyptian star, like looking amazing and being really positive. Would it have made things easier for you, even though your rights wouldn't have been different, but would presumably growing up you didn't have a public famous like trans man Arab that you could
I didn't know trans people existed. I didn't know it was a possibility. But to
exactly,
answer
that's
the
what
Yeah, the first part of the question, I mean, I think Hisham Salim is, yes, able to do it because he lives in Guna, which is like, it's not in, it's like way out on the Red Sea, and as you mentioned, it's a place for lots of very elite figures, and his father's, status allows him to be out at that level.
mm-hmm.
But the fact that he's a trans man is really what makes it possible. I think there's probably always been trans men in Egypt, and they we didn't know about them, and so I'm not. There's no way that we can measure like if there's more or less people transitioning because they feel like there's room for them to transition. But naturally, as a trans man, it's easier. I want to say that it's not easy, but it's easier than being a trans woman, and there's probably trans men walking around the streets of Cairo that we don't even know that they're trans,
Yeah.
So there's a level of ease that trans men have in doing that. It would have been nice, yeah, to have him when I was growing up. Definitely. Just, I mean, that's a big shift, I think, globally, is the fact that trans people are visible. It can help. I don't know if it would help my parents, though. Is like, that's the problem, is the boomers. Like, the boomers are the and so I probably would have had the same fight with my parents. I know a trans Jordanian guy. He just got asylum in Canada, you know, because his parents wanted to lock him up in the house in Jordan. He just graduated from college. It's exactly what happened to me. Kind of, is like that same. So what I'd say, you know, I know actually I know another trans man who's living in the U.S. He's Jordanian and he got asylum. So, and we're getting word from lots of trans people now, because of there's a backlash, that are trying to get out of Egypt or Arab countries and just trying to get the hell out. So it feels like a rerun of the 90s for me. I don't know if visibility has happened.
Yeah. And we actually haven't mentioned that you are based in Germany. I don't think we've said this at any point. So in case that wasn't clear, you're not speaking to us like from Beirut or from Jordan. Or yeah. So I think it's really key not to over exaggerate. I don't know, for me it's something about getting that balance between, you know, celebrating when there is a bit of visibility but only valuing it for what it is, and not getting carried away and saying, oh, you know, it's all fine now because look at this you know, Egyptian actor's son, or things like that.
The bubble that we're talking about is thinking that what we're seeing in terms of representation on social media translate necessarily into wider acceptance or wider rights, and that's been the danger of social media. I mean, look at J.K. Rowling, for fuck's sake.
Yeah. Having got ourselves to the point of utter despair at the reality of what it's like to be queer or LGBT in the Arab world, we're going to try to pick ourselves up off the floor now a little bit with the most popular, amazing section. Oh, I'm on my own. Okay. Section of the show, which is the queer idea. So yeah, each time I have the guest bring a queer idea that is empowering, maybe life-changing, important in some way, to them to share with us. And here we are, lifting ourselves up with ideas and theory and notions. So it looks like we're going to start with me, seeing as the camera is on me. So I'll start then. So my idea is, well, it's not something that I know very much about, but I find it exciting. So it's a new biological approach, but it's not just biological, which is really compatible with queer theory, and it's called biopsychosocial theory. So it's that compound word of biological, psychological, social. So it's biopsychosocial. And the idea of it is that the forces that are at play on humans are completely enmeshed and interwoven, entangled, amazing web of the biological, the psychological, and the social, and that they can't be separated, and that they are co-influencing each other at all times, and that actually how this impacts on our gender and our sexuality is that it makes for infinite diversity and abundant fluidity. So rather than the old archaic construct of very fixed identities, let alone the binary and the normative, but even the, I guess you could call it first wave idea of kind of there's not just straight, there's gay or whatever. We're moving away from those very fixed constructs of the concrete and the set into a space of fluidity and diversity, which reflects the organic nature of what it is to be a human within our biology and our psychology and our society or our social context. So yeah, biopsychosocial, that's about as much as I can say about it, but look it up. I think it's exciting. Maybe I should also say that I actually got it from this book. Oh, I don't know if I can reach it. I'll show the book after Amal's done their slot. Are you ready, Amahl? Follow that,
no.
mate. That's about as theoretical as I get. But I'm not going to do that thing that women always do of downplaying what they just said. But yeah.
And you shouldn't, because it was absolutely fantastic, and I have nothing to say. I think I'm gonna get on board with your idea.
No, come on. We're gonna put the camera on you and you can give us a queer idea. It could be a cooking recipe. It doesn't have to be something that you just got this morning from your queer theory book like I did.
No, I think it's happening already, in the sense that queers are already turning a lot to plants, and I think that queers are turning a lot to plants and to tarot and to magic and to spells and to ritual and to kind of their rightful place in history and the things that they always used to be responsible for in society as healers and as medicine people and shamans. And so for me, I think always going on and on about having, land and a commune, and I think we should be given that space to heal from our trauma and to also rediscover the ancestral knowledge that was taken from us, and reclaim the place in society that we used to belong to, which was healers and shamans and medicine people. And so for me, that's the queer idea, is that we somehow find ways to live together physically, like instead of always talking about community as something virtual and online and whatever. For me, that's not working. It's like, what are the real relationships that we can have in a actual space, and what is the kind of earth nurturing and plant work that we can do and that we're already doing, but we need to have the place and time to redevelop that. I think it's happening, but I wish that there was a kind of a dedicated effort for that.
Yeah, I really, really agree. I think that would be amazing. I mean, for the queer witchcraft, if you want to call it that, or the queer shamanic power to really come up. I mean, with
I don't even think you have to say queer witchcraft. I think witches were queer.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, sorry, go ahead.
No, that's a really good point. Yeah, and the fact that we have to quantify it in that, or qualify it, I mean, in that way, shows this kind of crazy disconnect from that history, actually, because that intersection between healing and magic and queerness, if you want to call it that, we've been disconnected from, and we need to reclaim that, actually. And of course, I mean, we haven't got that much time left, but of course there's the amazing indigenous cultural thing in lots of cultures about two spirits and bi gender people, and right.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying.
That's something. Is that something that you've looked into much, like as
thanks to you,
as heritage?
Yeah, you told me about that 2 years ago, and I was like stunned. And then the more that I read, the more that I discovered like almost all of it was queer or trans. And it makes sense that now we're living in this kind of racial capital and capitalistic society where we're taken away from those roles, where we're pushed to the margins because of this. You know what I mean? It's part and parcel of that for me. So I think, yeah, I don't know if I'm making any sense.
Yeah, you are.
But
yeah.
Like I heard, a friend of mine told me, she's South African. She was saying in order to be a Sangoma in South Africa, you almost have to be queer. They don't really accept straight people into that. So it's like it's part of the craft of it. So and yeah, and so many gods were transgender. So many. So it makes sense that we're living in a system where, you know, God is a man and trans people are marginalized, queer people are marginalized, artists are for entertainment, they're not for healing and for medicine. And so this goes back to Artaud, because he was saying that it's exactly for this, that the theater was ritual. And so going back to ritual will bring women and trans people and BIPOC people back into their rightful place.
Yeah. Wow. So actually, maybe it's going back to the roots of theatre. Like, do you think that theatre kind of became performative? Because you know, sometimes when people try to do ritual, as ritual, you know, as magic, like in kind of hippie culture, it can become a performance instead. And I want it to be more participatory and less performative. So I wonder, do you think that did theatre kind of crystallize out of something that was more raw and more participatory?
Yeah,
That's a stupid
absolutely.
question, probably.
Even in the Middle Ages, I was telling you about the Wakefield plays, and it's like everybody in the community was. In Germany, the playwright used to be a shoemaker, or, you know, whatever. Those were the people who did theater, and they would do it in the town square, and they would do religious pageants and really fantastic works of art. And then suddenly it belonged to the bourgeoisie, and there were tickets, and there was a building, and there were professional actors. I mean, Queen Victoria, you know, she outlawed amateur theater, actually, and actors were persecuted for practicing amateur theater during the Reformation. And so from that point on, in the Renaissance, unfortunately, the Renaissance brought an end to the kind of to this accessibility of theater, and turned it into entertainment, and turned it into something very elite and bourgeois. And with the fourth wall, even, there didn't used to be a fourth wall. You know what I mean? That people would know this is an actor, and we're, you know, it was like, it was something popular in the sense of it belonged to the people, and now it no longer does. So, and it's lost its religious connotations, because theater always had that. In Greek times, it was a worship of Dionysus. In the Middle Ages, it was, you know, a Catholic kind of, it was Catholic worship and explanations of the Bible. And so now,
So the sacred.
Yes, sacred is a better word. So, yeah.
Okay, well, that makes it sound like your future work is going to be really, really exciting. I look forward to seeing, yeah, the outcome of that. I want to ask you one more thing, but I just want to show this book because I think this is really, really great. I can't line it up with the camera. There we go. I think this is such a great book, and I really recommend it to anybody who, if you're like me, and maybe, yeah, I am the same age as Amahl, also born in the 70s, and didn't have access to this kind of stuff at the amazing tender age that it could have probably really changed my life. And then I didn't study it, you know, I've had my head in Arabic dictionaries mainly for years. So yeah, I really recommend this book, and a really accessible way to get into life-changing queer ideas and theory. Right, so before we go, I want to ask you about, you've got this upcoming trip to Beirut. One, I want to hear about the project, but two, like, how does anybody fly anywhere at the moment and be you know, what's going on with the regime for that? How do you get like allowed to cross borders and stuff like that with COVID around?
We have to take a test before getting on the flight, and then we have to take the test when we arrive, and then we have to wait for the results to come out.
So do you have to quarantine when you get there whilst you wait for the results?
Yeah. Yes.
Okay, so that
after we take the test, we have to quarantine as well.
Right, so that's quite an operation then. And what is it that what's it that you're going there to work on?
I'm working on a new queer play with some queer and trans friends in Lebanon, and we're in the first stage of it, which is a stage of devising the material together, and then hopefully we'll fundraise for the second part, which would be, you know, completing the text and rehearsing and performing.
And is that something that you've been co-authoring, or how's it working?
Well, we've been planning this for about a year, and co-authoring in the sense that it's devised, but it looks like I'll be, you know, taking that material and composing the script, but it's still something that we're figuring out. Yeah.
Okay, so, and do you have a title or anything that people can look out for, especially if you're going to do a fundraiser?
Yeah, I'll let you know.
Okay, all right. So, if people want to see more of your work, can they still catch up with She, He, Me? I think that's still online, isn't it?
It's offline now. It was only 4 days, so unfortunately not.
Oh, okay. So, how can people find your work
I
online
have
or whatever?
I have a very a very I have a Wix website. I can send you the link for you to post if you want. But it's a Wix website. I still didn't buy the domain name. Even I'm very reluctant to create a website. I feel like it's a bit of a cliche. You know, I
So
can
this
send
doesn't
you
sound
the
like
link.
the best way for people to find your work, but yeah, is that the best way? If people are kind of like, oh my God, this person's amazing, I want to watch their stuff. They got to go and look at your clunky website.
Yes.
Okay, all right, we'll post the name of that.
Okay.
All right. So thank you so much for joining me and being so interesting. And all power to you and your projects and your work.
Thank you for having me.
And yeah, thanks for coming. And thanks everyone for watching. And I'll see you next time for the next riveting episode of Sabah el MeeM. Bye.